In this English lesson, we'll read a CNN news article together. And as we read the article, you'll learn advanced English vocabulary in context. You'll learn the correct grammar and the correct pronunciation at the same time. This is an advanced article discussing the impact of internet addiction. If you can understand this article, your English is excellent. Welcome back to JForrest English. Of course, I'm Jennifer. Now let's get started.
First, I'll read the headline, How Internet Addiction May Affect Your Teen's Brain, according to a new study. Who is your teen? Or what is a teen? Who or what is a teen? And in this case, your teen. Do you know? A teenager is a person aged 13 to 19. So those are the teens. The first teen is 13, 12, 13. And the last teen is 19, 20. So this age range represents a teenager. Now you can just say age 13 to 19. This dash is verbalized as 2, 13 to 19, 2 to 19. You can also say years old, but it's not required. So it's optional. Now, teen is the shortened form of teenager and is gender neutral. So you could say my teenage daughter or my teenage son. And notice in that case, teenage is an adjective, my teenage daughter. You could also say my daughter is a teenager. It's a noun, so you need that article a. So in this article, the use of your, this article is speaking to a parent who has a teenage daughter or son. So by saying your teen's brain, it means your son's brain, your daughter's brain, and your son or daughter is a teenager. Now let's look at the use of how in this headline, because in this case, it is not used to ask a question. It's a statement. The question would be, how does? In the past simple, it would be how did. So how does internet addiction affect your teen's brain or affect you? And then question mark because it's a question. Now in this case, how internet addiction may affect your brain. This is common when you generally are going to provide different reasons. For example, how improving your English can help you. So this is a statement form. And then underneath, you might provide reason 1, reason 2, reason 3. So for example, you can find a better job, you can travel easily, and then you can add all the other reasons. So if you're here to improve your English and you're excited to improve your English, put that's right, put that's right in the comments. And don't worry about taking these notes because I summarize everything in a free lesson PDF. You can find the link in the description. Now let's continue with the article. Teens, so notice here, teens is the short form for teenagers. But now they're talking about teens in general. They're not talking about your daughter or your son who is a teenager. They're talking about all teens, all teenagers. Because remember, when you add that S to a noun, you're talking about the whole group. So teens, the entire group of, the entire category of teens, teenagers who spend lots of time. Lots of time, this is a more casual way of saying a lot of time. So instead of saying a lot of, just saying lots, it sounds more casual, more informal. A lot of is still relatively informal. If you want to sound more formal, more academic, you could say a significant or a substantial. So significant, substantial means a large amount. But with these two, you have to use the word amount. So here you just say lots of time, a lot of time, but here a significant or a substantial amount of time. And this would sound quite formal, academic. Teens who spend lots of time on social media have complained of feeling like they can't pay attention to more important things like homework or time with loved ones. Remember, with homework, you do homework. I still hear students use the wrong verb, the wrong collocation. You do homework, which means complete. And homework is a collective noun, so you do not put an S on the noun. So you would say, I have so much homework to do. You never say it with an S. Now, instead of so much, you could also say lots of. I have lots of homework to do. You could also say a lot of. I have a lot of homework to do. You could say a significant amount of homework to do, but remember I said that sounds quite formal. That sounds almost academic. A teenager is not going to say that most likely. Let's review loved ones because this is very useful to have in your vocabulary. With loved ones, loved ones. So notice how those sounds link together. Repeat after me, loved ones. Loved ones are people you love. So remember, people is the plural of person, so it represents all the different people in your life who you love. Now, you can use a gerund statement, which is starting with your verb in ing, and you can say spending time. You spend time with people. So starting with a gerund verb, your verb in ing, this is used to make a general statement. Spending time with loved ones is the key to happiness. Key is the most important thing that results in happiness. Now, you can make loved ones possessive and say your loved ones, but that's not required. And it's common to just say spending time with loved ones. But if you want, you could say, I spent time with my loved ones, if you want. Let's continue. Almost half of teenagers, so again, the category of teenagers, people between 13 to 19, almost half, so 40%, 45%, 48%, we don't know, but it's close to half. Almost half of teenagers have said they feel addicted to social media, according to a survey this year. Now notice with according, you need this preposition, and then you have a someone, a person, according to Jessica, according to my teacher, according to a survey. So it can be someone or something like a survey, a report, a news article.
Are you enjoying this lesson? If you are, then I want to tell you about the Finally Fluent Academy. This is my premium training program where we study native English speakers from TV, movies, YouTube, and the news so you can improve your listening skills of fast English, expand your vocabulary with natural expressions, and learn advanced grammar easily. Plus, you'll have me as your personal coach. You can look in the description for the link to learn more, or you can go to my website and click on Finally Fluent Academy. Now let's continue with our lesson.
A new study has possibly captured that objectively. So here, that, what does that represent? Has possibly captured that. That being the fact that teenagers are addicted to social media and have problems paying attention to their homework. All of what we previously discussed is summarized as that. A new study has possibly captured that objectively. Objectively means there is now facts or evidence. But notice it says possibly. Has possibly captured. Without this word, possibly, has captured, it sounds like fact, but because they add possibly, it's just a possibility. So there is also a possibility that there is no evidence, no objective evidence of this. A new study has possibly captured that objectively, finding that for teens diagnosed with internet addiction, Signaling between brain regions important for controlling attention, working memory, and more was disrupted. Okay, so finding, in this case, that is optional. It doesn't represent anything. So sometimes the word that can represent a lot of information, and other times it's literally meaningless and can be omitted. Finding for teens diagnosed. It's like when you say, I think that. There's no meaning for that. It's just a connecting word and it's optional. So finding that for teens diagnosed with internet addiction. So we're talking about teens, but specifically teens with internet addiction, signaling. So this means when you signal in your brain, it means that you can imagine there are wires in your brain, like this image up here. So to signal is when this connection talks to this connection. So they talk to each other. They have a connection. So that would be signaling. So that's how that word is being used here. So signaling between brain regions, and then which brain regions? The ones that are for controlling attention, memory, and more was disrupted. So the signaling was disrupted, which means that your brain cells, the different regions of your brains, had a hard time, had a difficult time, or had problems communicating with each other, connecting with each other. And here, disrupted, you can think of it as negatively impacted or simply not working properly. Now, said another way, teens with internet addiction have a hard time or have a difficult time focusing. So what do you notice here? You need the verb and ing. This is a very common gerund expression that I hear a lot of mistakes with. So just remember, when you have, and then there's an adjective, hard, difficult, and then the word time. You could even use a positive adjective. We had a great time preparing for the party, for example. So it's have a adjective time. That's a gerund expression. Now you could also use have trouble, and then you use the gerund. So teens with internet addiction have trouble focusing. So both of these are very common gerund expressions that you can start using today. Let's continue. The findings are from a review. So the findings represent the information they found in the study. So the findings are from a review of 12 neuroimaging studies. So imaging means X-rays to take pictures of, and then neuro represents your brain. So pictures of your brain. Review of 12 neuroimaging studies of a few hundred adolescents. Adolescents, repeat after me, adolescents. This means young people. And here they define that for you, aged 10 to 19. Now they had to change the word from teenager to adolescent because teenager starts at 13. So from 10, 11, 12, you are not a teenager. That is not the definition. So because it started at 10, they had to use a different word choice instead of teenager, and they used adolescence. And remember, by adding the S, you mean the entire category of adolescents aged 10 to 19. And then from 2013, so this is the date range for the study. So there was an age range and a date range from 2013 to 2022. And a few hundred, we don't know how many that is. A few is more than two, because if it were two, they'd say a couple hundred. So I don't know how many it is, but I know it's 300 or more. So maybe 300 or 400 or 500. That would be my guess based on what this word means. Let's continue. The behavioral addiction brought on by excessive internet use. So here, this phrasal verb, brought on. Brought is the past simple of bring, brought. brought on by. If something is brought on by, it means that it caused it to happen. Let's review this example. The fire was brought on by old paint cans in the basement. So the fire was caused by. This is the passive form because the active form, the subject is the old paint cans. The old paint cans, where are they located? In the basement. The old paint cans caused the fire. Brought on the fire, you could say as well, using brought on in the active form. Now, in our sentence, notice that there is no verb to be. That's because it's using that information as more descriptive. So the fire brought on by old paint cans in the basement destroyed the home. So I could remove this entire part. The fire destroyed the home. But I'm giving more information. The fire brought on by old paint cans in the basement. Sometimes you see this information between two commas, which lets you know that this entire part can be removed. But if you don't see it by commas when you read it, you just have to understand where the information is. So the behavioral addiction brought on by excessive internet use caused the addiction, has become a rising source of concern. So here you could say the behavioral addiction has become a rising source of concern. And then this is just the additional information telling you where the addiction came from. What was it caused by? Has become a rising source of concern since the last decade. The authors, plural, the authors wrote in the study. Let's review this since the last decade. We use since for a starting point in time. So even though they wrote the last decade, the only way this is grammatically correct is if it represents a starting point in time. So the last decade is a period of 10 years. So 2015 to 2025, assuming the year right now is 2025. So the only way this is correct if it's since 2015, because since is only used with the starting point in time. Because of that, it would sound better to say since 2015, the actual start of the last decade, or you could say since the beginning of the last decade, because the beginning of sounds more specific. It sounds like, well, what's the beginning? It's 2020, it's 2015. That's the beginning of the last decade. So using either one of these sounds better with since, because to me, the last decade sounds more like a date range, and we only use for with ranges for the last decade, which represents 2015 to 2025. Remember, since plus specific point in time, for plus a range, a time range. Let's continue. The criteria for clinical diagnosis of internet addiction in the included studies were one's persistent preoccupation with the internet. So preoccupation with means you're distracted by, you're constantly thinking about the internet. Now, persistent is another way of saying constantly. So if it's persistent, it means it happens again and again and again and again. So it's constant. So that's one, persistent preoccupation with the internet. Withdrawal symptoms when away from the internet. A withdrawal symptom means that you either feel something physically, your hands might start to shake. For example, that could be a withdrawal symptom of someone who's trying to quit smoking. Their hands might start to shake, or it can be more emotional. You just feel really anxious or frustrated when you're away from the internet. So when you're not using the internet. And another criteria is sacrificing relationships to spend time on the internet. So sacrificing your relationship means that you're neglecting it. In order to spend time on the internet, your relationship suffers. So you're choosing the internet over your relationship. So you're sacrificing your relationship to gain time on the internet. And remember that spend time is a gerund verb. So if you had an action, you would need the verb in ing. Spend time surfing online. Now, online is the alternative to on the internet, but if you use online, just know it's one word, online. On the internet, online. So spend time surfing online, spend time watching videos online, spend time posting online. Whatever the actions are, they're in the verb ing, the gerund, because spend time is a gerund verb. But you spend time on the internet. You could also simply say spend time online instead of on the internet, because remember, online is the replacement to these three words on the internet, said one author of the study. The pattern of behavior results in significant impairment or distress in the individual's life. So the pattern of behavior, this would be spending too much time online. So the addiction to the internet. So the pattern of behavior. Spending too much time online results in significant impairment or distress in the individual's life. So distress, this represents negative emotions, and then impairment, this sounds like negative effects. So if your vision is impaired, it means you're not able to see clearly. So if your life is impaired, it means you're not able to function properly in your life. So the examples they gave of not being able to do their homework because they can't focus, that could be an example of how their life is impaired. Let's continue. When participants, so participants, these are the people who participated in the study. When participants clinically diagnosed with internet addiction, so these are participants who have an addiction to the internet and they've been clinically diagnosed, this means a doctor or a researcher has formally said you have internet addiction, you have internet addiction. So clinically diagnosed means I didn't just say, I think I'm addicted to the internet. Someone with authority, a doctor or a researcher, said this. When participants clinically diagnosed, so formally diagnosed by an expert, clinically diagnosed with internet addiction, engage in activities governed by the brain's executive function network. Now they're going to define what the brain's executive function network is, because this is not common knowledge. I do not instantly know what this is. So what is it? It's behaviors requiring attention, planning, decision-making, and impulse control. So that is your brain's executive function network. Those brain regions showed substantial disruption. Remember previously I said substantial is a more formal way of saying a lot of. So you could say showed a lot of disruption, much disruption. Negative effects would be disruption. But substantial or significant is the more formal academic choice. Those brain regions showed substantial disruption in their ability to work together compared to those in peers without internet addiction. So all this to say, the participants, so people who have internet addiction, when they did certain behaviors. So engaged in activities governed by is a very formal way of saying did activities. So when they did activities requiring their attention, planning, decision making, or impulse control, those were the type of activities. So when someone formally diagnosed with internet addiction tried to pay attention, they had disruption in those brain regions. So they had negative effects in those brain regions compared to other people. So that's their peers, other people in the same category without internet addiction. Let's continue. The authors think such signaling changes, so remember, signaling is just how those wires in your brain connect or communicate with each other. And the changes for the people with internet addiction is those connections were impaired. They weren't working as well. They weren't working properly. The authors think such signaling changes could suggest these behaviors can become more difficult to perform, potentially influencing development and well-being. So these behaviors can become more difficult to perform. The behaviors being decision-making, paying attention, planning, controlling your impulses. So those behaviors could be more difficult because of this impairment in your brain signals because of internet addiction. And all of this might, because potentially is just the possibility. So you could replace that with the modal verb might. If you did, you would have to use the base verb might influence, because modal plus base verb might influence development and well-being, potentially influencing development and well-being. And that is the end of the article. So what I'll do now is I'll read the article from start to finish. And I also recommend that you read this article again because there is a lot of complicated language, but you can summarize it in an easy to understand everyday terms. So that could be a great exercise for you to read a paragraph and then try to summarize it in everyday language as if you were explaining it to a teenager. So someone who has a lower reading level. So that's a great activity to do. So now I'll read it from start to finish. How internet addiction may affect your teen's brain, according to a new study. Teens who spend lots of time on social media have complained of feeling like they can't pay attention to more important things like homework or time with loved ones. Almost half of teenagers have said they feel addicted to social media, according to a survey this year. A new study has possibly captured that objectively, finding that for teens diagnosed with internet addiction, signaling between brain regions important for controlling attention, working memory, and more was disrupted. The findings are from a review of 12 neuroimaging studies of a few hundred adolescents aged 10 to 19 from 2013 to 2022. The behavioral addiction brought on by excessive internet use has become a rising source of concern since the last decade, the authors wrote in the study. The criteria for clinical diagnosis of internet addiction in the included studies were one's persistent preoccupation with the internet, withdrawal symptoms when away from the internet, and sacrificing relationships to spend time on the internet, said one author of the study. The pattern of behavior results in significant impairment or distress in the individual's life. When participants clinically diagnosed with internet addiction engage in activities governed by the brain's executive function network, behaviors requiring attention, planning, decision-making, and impulse control, those brain regions showed substantial disruption in their ability to work together compared to those in peers without internet addiction. The authors think such signaling changes could suggest these behaviors can become more difficult to perform, potentially influencing development and well-being.
Do you want me to make another lesson where we learn English with the news? If you do, put let's go, put let's go in the comments. And of course, make sure you like this lesson, share it with your friends, and subscribe so you're notified every time I post a new lesson. And you can get this free speaking guide where I share 6 tips on how to speak English fluently and confidently. You can click here to download it or look for the link in the description. And you can keep improving your English with this lesson right now.